All right. Well, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it. Um, I appreciate all letting me come here today and share with you a little bit about some of these things related to dementia. I have some information that I'd like to go over with everybody and hopefully answer any questions you have about different types of dementia, some things that we can do that are helpful. Um, there's a lot of good things that come out of this conference. I love coming every year. I've presented for the last couple or so years, and I've enjoyed that. But one thing I love is there are a lot of things that, as caregivers and loved ones, that we make connections to and learn from being here. So I love to see people attending. This is great. I love it. And I appreciate MAG for all their efforts in this. It's excellent. All right. Well, we'll kind of dive into what I'm here to talk about. And I'm here to talk about types of dementia, some things, specifics to that. I know there are a lot of questions when it comes to the word dementia that come up, and a lot of things that people are not entirely sure of, and what does that mean versus this? And hopefully this can give us a little insight and also give us things to look out for that can be helpful. All right, so the objectives of what things we're going to try and cover today, I've listed here. I want to see if we can talk about what it is, the different types, how we diagnose it, and then maybe talk about some of the things that we can do. Um, First of all, let's define it. All right, what is dementia? And I think this is important that we understand. It's not necessarily that we're calling dementia the specific disease, but dementia is a group of conditions. When there are more than one thing going on with cognition that are outside of normal uh, levels, we can technically diagnose dementia. Now, this is something that I think is uh, something that if we know someone who's had dementia in our lives, we can see some of these things that take place. Technically, for a definition of what defines dementia, we have to have one notable memory deficit plus one other cognitive area of decline. And that can be any number of things. And I've listed a few here. So we can have difficulty with visual spatial, getting lost or turned around easily. We can have verbal deficits. There can be things related to executive function or, some personality, irritability, things like that that can also be part of that. All right. This umbrella helps us to understand a little bit more about dementia. And the reason I put this on here is because of what I've listed over here. One of the most frequently asked questions I get in my clinic is what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't honestly know. And that's okay because I don't think it's ever really discussed a whole lot. But to give a little clarity, this picture kind of helps us understand it. So if we think of dementia as an umbrella, that's a term, right? And under that umbrella, we have multiple types of dementia. So when people say, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Well, Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. And so dementia is kind of that broad term that is thrown out a lot, and you hear that term quite a bit, but oftentimes not quite sure, well, what does that fully mean? Well, it means you've got a type of dementia, a disease process potentially that's going on that's creating that cognitive change within the brain. And as you can see, 60 to 80% of cases of dementia are Alzheimer's, which is why they're used interchangeably, because there's a pretty good chance you're going to, if you call it Alzheimer's, you're probably going to be right. But there are other types as well. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what about all these different types? And how do we know which one's which? And in our loved one, maybe we see some changes, but we can't tell what that's related to. Maybe this will give us a little direction as to what it is we're looking at and get more detail. All right. So the other types of dementia, we'll talk a little bit about Lewy body, vascular, frontotemporal, and then there's a whole subset of others that exist. I'm going to talk a little bit about Parkinson's, but there are some other ones as well that are part of that under that dementia umbrella. We also see here that there is a possibility of having a mixed type. So somebody could potentially have some Alzheimer's that maybe genetically they're predisposed to because their family has some in their family history line, but also they've had maybe a stroke. So they've got some vascular type plus the Alzheimer's type. So you can have a mixed type of dementia as well. All right. So let's start off with the big one, the most common type, Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease, like I said, 60 to 80% of cases. And this is the one that you're going to see most typically. And when people present with starting stages of dementia, this is a lot of times kind of the traditional presentation where you start noticing, okay, there's a little something going on with memory here. Like we had a conversation an hour ago and I just brought it up again and my loved one doesn't even have a clue that we talked about that. That's kind of those beginning stages of, hey, I just talked about this. You don't remember that? This is a little more than just, I set my keys down and I don't remember where my keys are, but I retraced my steps and found them. We all do that to some degree, right? And so this is a little more than that. You start noticing repetition maybe in some of the things that are said, or it's a lot of those short-term memory factors that are part of this. Um, Word finding difficulties. Well, again, that's another one of those things where we all have some word finding difficulties. Myself in my 40s, I will struggle to think of a word and cannot remember it. But an hour later, I'll go, oh, that was the word that I was looking for. That doesn't mean that I have Alzheimer's or that I'm on the starting steps of that. It's a normal part of living. But if we, through prompts and other things like that, can't get those words to come back, or we're seeing this happening more frequently or a little more in depth, then we start wondering, well, should we look at that a little more, maybe do some testing and see what's going on there? All right. Um, Beginning stages usually have to do with those things, with short-term memory, some verbalization, things like that. A little bit later on, you'll start noticing some reasoning, judgment, things that do occur. But we're talking more about kind of those beginning recognition things, okay? Next type that I wanted to just bring up is Lewy body. And as we saw from the umbrella slide, it's about 5 to 10% of cases. Now, Lewy body dementia is a different kind of dementia. And the way that it presents in kind of those early stages is different than Alzheimer's. Um, Alzheimer's is a result of, as far as we know, some plaques, some tau tangles, some amyloid plaques, things like that that build up within the brain. This is some proteins within the brain that can clump and create these Lewy bodies, as we call them. And they tend to cause a different presentation of how somebody acts. And so with Lewy body dementia, one of the things that stands out most, I think, in this presentation is hallucinations. Um, you'll have people that have Lewy body dementia, and one of the first things you notice is you don't necessarily notice them forgetting things a whole lot, but you do notice that they're seeing that they're saying that they see things or they're hearing things that other people are not. A lot of times it's kind of those very beginning stages. Someone will say, I feel like there are spiders crawling on the wall over here, and there aren't, right? So those are things that with Lewy body dementia, you kind of start to see. There are also some physical symptoms as well. A lot of times Lewy body and Parkinson's disease, they kind of get lumped together because they present similarly. And Lewy body dementia has some of that rigidity, that shuffling gait, some of those components of Parkinson's that you would see in the beginning stages. So that's one of those things where we want to just kind of say, when we're doing an initial consultation or interview to find out what's going on, we're going to try and weed out some things and ask about some of those details of how a person is presenting, both physical symptoms, cognitive as well, any hallucinations, things like that, because that helps us to know a little bit more what to look for. All right. Vascular dementia. This one, you'll probably see some similar presentation to somebody who maybe has Alzheimer's disease because that memory and things like that can be similar. But the thing that'll be different in this is that you're going to see more of a stepwise progression, whereas Alzheimer's might be kind of a gradual, slow, steady decline. Vascular dementia is probably going to be something like this. Here's your normal function level, and then boom, we're down at this level. And then again, that stepwise, it happens kind of a rapid change from one point to the next rather than that gradual decline that you see over time. And that's probably more due to the fact that some of these cases are related to a stroke or a vascular event. And a stroke, when it comes on quick, that causes that change rapidly. Vascular dementia can also be a result of having high blood pressure over a long period of time and other things like that. Things that directly affect that vasculature system within the brain. Those are pieces that we always want to know about when we're talking to somebody to find out what are the components of your health history that could be a contributor to what type of dementia you have. All right. So that's something you'd look for with a vascular type. All right. Frontotemporal dementia. This one is a bit of an interesting presentation. This tends to be more of a behavioral type of a change. We've talked about, with Alzheimer's, the memory is kind of the first thing you notice. With Lewy body, some of those hallucinations. Vascular is kind of that stepwise change. With the frontotemporal dementia, it's usually a behavioral change. Suddenly, this person's a little less agreeable. They're a little more grumpy, maybe. They don't have as much patience as they used to. Some of those behavioral changes and personality changes are obvious and upfront. And part of the reason for that is the frontotemporal dementia affects directly, like it says, this frontotemporal region of the brain. This part of the brain is heavily responsible for a lot of these things that are listed here, for personality, for language, for that behavior. It's an interesting presentation sometimes because you don't recognize it as a dementia right up front. You usually start thinking someone's just kind of being mean or something. And it's not that they're trying to, it's what's happening to their brain in that region. That region of the brain tends to start to shrink even, and the other areas don't. And so that change can be a hard one to figure out or to weed out what is going on here. Right? Language I put on here I think is interesting because there can also be types of frontotemporal dementia that are a little bit different. I mentioned, dementia as a whole, there's an umbrella, and then there are all these different types. Well, frontotemporal has its own little umbrella, and there are a few different types. One particular type under that is something we call primary progressive aphasia, which is people start losing their ability to come up with words, or when they go to speak, they don't know what the definition of that word they're saying is, or they kind of spit out a word salad and it's not coherent or making sense. And so there are a bunch of different types of frontotemporal that can present, and that primary progressive aphasia is one of them. So some things that you look out for when you're kind of not sure what that is, come get it checked out and let's see if we can figure out what's going on and do some testing to identify more of the details of the specifics of how things are presenting. All right. So those are a few of the specifics. Wait, did I skip through Parkinson's? Yeah, I did. Okay, let's go back. Parkinson's disease. Again, as I showed on that umbrella slide, that one was a very small portion underneath. Because Parkinson's, we tend to see a lot more of the physical piece of change for an individual. It usually presents physical right up front, where we're seeing kind of that pill rolling or tremor in the hand. You get some of those facial expression changes. You get some of that rigidity in movement, some shuffling gait, things of that nature. So Parkinson's has those physical symptoms, but Parkinson's with dementia is another type of dementia. And when we talk about that, we're talking about a similar presentation of even something like Alzheimer's, where you start to see some of that memory shift. But that usually is secondary to the physical symptoms that come on first. So we do keep a close eye out when we know somebody has Parkinson's to see and track kind of where their cognition is going, just to see if it ends up as Parkinson's with that dementia component. All right, so something worth watching if you know a loved one with Parkinson's. Okay. Um, this slide is terrible. I apologize. Can you read it? I I did that. I don't know what it's called. Design help button in PowerPoint up in the corner that puts everything in just for you, just right. And it turned all the words white. And then I went and changed it back to some darker colored words. And then I submitted it and it came up this way on the final one. I don't know how this happened. Anyway, so I apologize. There are words in those boxes. But basically what I have here is how do we diagnose when it comes to dementia? Because there are a lot of ways to go about this. And primarily, in most cases, when you start noticing some changes in a loved one, you'll go to your primary care doctor. They'll probably do a quick 5-minute, real basic assessment where they have you, remember these 3 words, and I'll come back to them and that kind of thing, and draw a clock. There's some basic level things that are good to give us an idea. But that gives us just a small idea. There are some better ways to find even greater detail that can dive in and help us even weed out some of the specifics of what's under that umbrella, rather than to say it's just dementia. Well, we can say, okay, there's a dementia component with a frontotemporal concern here, or there's a dementia component that has to do with that progressive aphasia, things like that. We can really weed out some of those details. And that's what a neuropsychological examination is. Neuropsychological exams are performed by neuropsychologists, and that's a term that we don't really hear a lot about. We hear about psychologists, we hear about neurologists. Well, a neuropsychologist is where those two worlds meet, because the way we feel about things and the way our brain processes that stuff, someone's got to look at how that all works together. And that's what a neuropsychologist does. And so we have in-house neuropsychology at where I work, and we can do these exams. The neuropsychological examination is the gold standard for diagnosing dementia. It helps us to really identify those specifics, as I mentioned, and weed out what parts of the brain are processing compared to other people of the same age and same education level of the individual. So we can take a standardized exam and administer it to one person, and at the end calculate up all of their scores and say, okay, here's average for age and education. Are you above average, below average, or somewhere right where you would expect to be? And if you're above average in, say, some of those frontal lobe functions, being able to multitask or being able to reason or judgment or things like that, but you're below average in all the memory tasks, and then we find that you're below average in, say, a verbal task or something like that, well, then we can identify, okay, this seems more like this type of dementia than this type of dementia. And so it helps us to identify a little bit more, because then we can hone in on some of the specifics, maybe some of the therapies, some of the details and things that can be beneficial there. So that's where neuropsychology comes in and is a bit helpful in being able to identify those details. Of course, doing an exam, just at your primary care doctor, being able to go and weed out some of the details of past health history and what things in that could contribute to some of the symptoms that are going on. We want to be able to rule out anything else that is a contributor before we label that and identify it as an official diagnosis of dementia, but we want to make sure that we have looked at everything else that could be a contributing factor in that. All right, that's why I have here on the, rule out other causes. We want to do some labs, look at other things that sometimes are a factor in there. Is there any thyroid issue? Is there a deficit in some of the B12, for example, is something that can be one of those things that makes a bit of an impact on how the brain processes. And then we also look at, additional there are additional genetic testing things that are available. There's some really cool stuff out there that if you're suspicious or wonder about what your future looks like, you can go and get some testing done that way. But there's even really neat stuff that's coming out in the world right now that helps us with even more diagnostics by looking at what's in the blood, right? So I won't get into too much of the specifics there because some of that's even advancing right now, but the future looks great. There's a lot of cool things up and coming, I think. So diagnostics are done. We look at a few of those specifics and try and figure out what's going on here. You've done a neuropsychological evaluation. We've identified the areas of the brain that maybe are having some of these more noticeable deficits. Maybe have diagnosed that there's an Alzheimer's type of dementia going on or something along those lines. And we have that information. Well, just having that information is not very helpful if you're not going to do anything with it. I think there's a lot of value in doing something about it. And that's what I want to focus a little bit on in these next few slides is what should we be doing once we've figured out what's going on? And, there are some great scientific advancements being made and maybe some medications that are up and coming. Right now, there's nothing that's incredible as far as medications are concerned out on the market. Some things that maybe help aid a little bit, but we've had some changes that have been announced and other things like that that are kind of exciting, but we'll see what that brings. Right for now, though, the things that we want to do are really focus on preserving function. As I mentioned before, with dementia, a lot of times we see the tendency to want to decline. That's how the brain kind of progresses through it. I mentioned the vascular stepwise, but all of these different progression patterns tend to go the same direction. And what we want to do is try and level that out a little bit. Now, we're not necessarily going to reverse it and bring things up this way, but if we can keep things holding steady for a while and maybe give our loved ones a few more years, maybe, of some of that maintained cognitive function, well, then that's what we want to do. We want to do that as much as we possibly can. And there are a few things we can do that'll help with that. And some of those things have to do with lifestyle. We hear that from every doctor visit you'll ever go to. It doesn't matter what you're going to the doctor for, they're always going to say you should be eating healthy, you should be exercising, and you should be sleeping well, right? Those are good things for the brain. When it comes to a diagnosis of dementia, that's no different. There's some really good evidence out there about what we take into our bodies that makes a big impact for how the brain works and processes, right? Our brains are made up of mostly fat. So, eating healthy and putting good fats into the body and other things like that, it makes sense to want to do that for your brain's health. So we talk a lot about Mediterranean diets for brain health. Mediterranean diets, healthy fats, cutting out the bad processed things for the brain that are not as good. Being able to focus on healthy, green, fresh fruits and vegetables, all of that kind of stuff. We know that that's going to be good for the brain. So anytime you can help maintain that, great. Now, whenever someone comes into my office and we're talking about making that lifestyle change for a caregiver, that's a tough thing to hear. Hey, you should try and change that diet, because somebody who's been eating this certain way for 80 years, and now we're going to say overnight, we're going to change your diet to something completely different, to something you probably don't like, that you haven't lived on and grown up eating. So I don't ask anyone to completely get rid of all the things you enjoy in life. But if you can start adding some of those things in and cutting some of the less helpful things out and just try and make some better choices, overall, that's going to be beneficial. So do your best. That's definitely a big part of this. All right. As far as with, we talked about diet, nutrition, physical activity, getting up and moving and walking regularly. I know sometimes there's a little bit of a tendency to sit more when diagnosis of dementia has been made. where that kind of apathy or less desire to be motivated and go and do something is present. And that falls to a caregiver to try and help motivate or say, let's go do this or redirect or things like that. And that can be a lot. It can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit challenging. And so you, again, doing your best, try and encourage activity. Get up and go for a walk on a daily basis and go out and enjoy some sunshine and fresh air, right? That can only help and be beneficial. Um, sleep. Sleep's a big deal. If one is not getting enough sleep, the brain isn't resetting very well for the next day. There is a system within our brains that we call the glymphatic system. And it sounds like lymphatic system, right? That's the system in our bodies that kind of pulls stuff out and gets rid of it. Well, this is in the neurological structures of our brain, this glymphatic system. And this system is really at its best and really kicked in and working at its best when we're in our deepest cycles of sleep. And what it does essentially is it's kind of like that furnace that when we've used all these neurotransmitters and things in our brain all day long, they tend to hang out in that space until something pulls them out, that furnace that burns them out and gets rid of all the excess. This glymphatic system, when we're in our deepest cycles of sleep, it does that. It pulls those things out, cleans up those processes and spaces a little bit more so that we have more clarity for the next day. We all use this when we sleep. But if we're not sleeping, well, then kind of getting a little bit of a buildup. And you notice when you're not sleeping well, that next day's cognitive processing isn't necessarily as strong as it was when you got a good night's rest. There's a reason for that. And so we want good sleep patterns. We try to encourage good sleep hygiene. There's a lot you can do in creating patterns and processes. At nighttime after you've had your dinner, if you do the same things each night, your brain starts getting into this repetitive process and saying, oh, it's time for that thing we do at this time, and sleep is coming, and we're getting geared up for that. And there's some real benefit to that. So, trying to do some of that can be really helpful as well. So that kind of covers a lot of that lifestyle piece that we always want to try and help with our loved ones when they've been diagnosed. We want to help try and get those things the best we can. But I tend to save this fourth item for last because I feel like it's one of the heaviest or most important of all of these things, and that is the cognitive stimulation. We have, diet, physical activity, sleep, and cognitive stimulation. We want to use that brain, use it or lose it, right? That's kind of how that works. And when we engage those pathways of the brain, our ability to preserve them goes up quite a bit. If we're not engaging pathways, that disease process is going to allow them to kind of fade, those neural pathways. And one way that we have really found that is most beneficial in preserving neural pathways is engagement, socialization. And when I say engagement, people don't usually always think of socialization. They think of, let's do some Sudoku, let's do some crossword puzzles, let's do some of those kind of things that can be fun and entertaining and occupy some time. Those things are good, but I tell you, the more you do of those things, the better you get at those things. But what about all the other things the brain can do? And so we want to focus on more than just that. And so we focus on cognitive stimulation through engagement with others, social activity. There is something really great that comes from connecting with other people, right? You don't necessarily think about all that you're doing when you're connecting with somebody else, but if you and I are having a conversation, well, think about what's happening during that conversation. You're reading my body language. You're thinking about what I'm saying. You're connecting it to all the feelings, thoughts, emotions, giving it context, creating new memories and storing them for later. You're forming opinions. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happening when you're social and when you're connected to other people. And so I feel like when you have the diagnostics are all done, you've got some things figured out, well, then the next step is to try to engage as much as you can to preserve that function. When you fire on all those different pathways, chances of keeping those pathways going goes up if you're engaged. So we where we are at Neural Effects, we do something called CST, or cognitive stimulation therapy. And I think this is something that's so important in preserving that function. Cognitive stimulation therapy was developed coming up on around 30 years ago in the United Kingdom. They created this process that has been really neat and great. And basically, because everyone in the UK is on socialized medicine, everybody gets to be a part of the program. So then they've been able to research and study a whole lot of information um, to see how well it helps people. And they found that it is as effective as any medication on the market in preserving cognitive function. Um, and and no medication side effects from this, right? So there's some real benefits to it. But what it is we basically take groups of 6 to 8 people at a time and who have recently been diagnosed with some mild dementia, kind of in those mild stages. And we do activities together in a social setting twice a week for an hour each. And during those events, we're focused on we start with physical activity where we do a little bit of recumbent bike exercise and we do some weights and some other things to get things moving and that blood pumping. We know there's benefit in that. We work on activities uh, to help with orientation. Orientation is our ability to tell where we are, time, place, person, situation, what's going on around us. And so we do orientation therapies where we work on preserving that ability to orient ourselves to what's going on around us. We do reminiscence therapies where we talk about things from our past. We'll pass a ball around with questions on it. You know, what was Halloween like when you were a kid? And people talk about it. And then we talk about it amongst ourselves and we laugh together at the funny stories and you know we sing a song together because there's some real benefit in having some music involvement, though it feels sometimes a little awkward to sing with a complete stranger about how you are my sunshine, right? But it's a good opportunity to stimulate those pathways in the brain. And I really appreciate what cognitive stimulation therapy is. And then at the end of each session for the last portion, we always work on something, whether it's memory or attention or some executive function or some activity that's going to get everybody involved and target different regions of the brain, and we switch it up. And we do that regularly, twice a week for, well, it's a 7-week program, and then we go into a maintenance period where it's once a week indefinitely, as long as people are feeling like they're maintaining and things are going okay. And in the process of that, we always want to track. I think it's important that we repeat the neuropsychological evaluation and see where things are. Are we preserving that function? Are we seeing a little bit of decline? The one thing that's a little bit hard to say is how much decline would have happened were we not doing it, but we can usually track pretty well that people do well longer overall when you compare it to large populations. And so I really feel strongly that, you know, therapies like that give some real good benefit to patients, not just for the fact that we're stimulating all those areas of the brain, but we do so much that can help keep that brain active and keep people connected to each other. Uh, they, People do well when they have those human connections, right? Okay, I'm just making sure I'm not running over time. I've dealt 2:15, right? Does that sound right? Okay, just for my own understanding of where I am. Okay. Well, other things that I want to mention that I didn't put on here. I've mentioned some cool things coming out, some technologies that are being studied and explored. Um, we're actually even doing some own exploration of some things that can be beneficial at our clinic that I think um, can potentially be some of the future of treatment when it comes to dementia. And one of the things that I think is really neat is something we call TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation. Um, and essentially what that is we take magnets that are connected to some heavy electrical current, but we can create a greater magnetic field when we send that electricity to them. And we put those over certain regions of the brain And when you send a magnetic pulse in a certain sequence into regions of the brain, what you can do is you can cause the neurons in that area of the brain to depolarize, which allows them to fire more. And with things like dementia, we know that firing potential has decreased. And if we can increase some of that firing potential and get the brain firing more and more, well, then we have a greater possibility of getting some of those connections and networks working a little bit more within the brain. And so we've been doing our own little studies and running our own sequence of treatment processes in our clinic with a TMS machine, which we have fMRI in-house, so we use MRI to guide where we're doing our treatments. So there's a lot to it, and I won't get into all of that. But what we're seeing with TMS is that we don't necessarily have the ability to reverse the memory loss with that. But what we can do with that is increase the connections that people have with each other, the emotions, the mood, things like that. TMS has typically been used in the past to treat depression, and it's now being found that it can do so much more. And there's some really cool stuff coming out with ultrasound of what this could potentially do in the future. And I'm really keeping a close eye on that because I want to see what that can do for people. But right now with the TMS, we've been running patients through for probably about the last 9 months to a year, roughly in that range, and been seeing some really cool things with how people feel like they get their loved one back, is what we've been told. I feel like I connect with them, or that we used to just ride in the car together and nothing would be said, and now we're having conversations again. Some of those things are sparking again. There's still confusion at moments. There's still memory loss, those things that are part of the disease process. But if it makes some of those behavioral components better, that can only potentially help in the process. So really cool things. I'm excited about the future when it comes to this. And we're going to keep our close eye on that, and I'll fill you in anytime that I see any of you. All right. Um, I wanted to share this. This is a picture of me with my, oh, no, me with my family, my mother and father, and my siblings. There are 8 of us kids, 4 boys and 4 girls, and my mom and dad. This is a picture from about 5 years ago, just before my father passed away. He passed away from Parkinson's disease, and I, being the healthcare provider in my family, I don't have any other siblings who are involved in healthcare. Uh, Somehow my siblings, I guess, dubbed me as the caregiver because I am the healthcare provider. So I got to go to all of Dad's appointments. I got to stop by Mom and Dad's house every day after work and help Dad get to the bathroom or to the shower or whatever it was, and was a pretty uh, pretty involved caregiver with my mom. My mom was there all day, but she couldn't do some of the heavy lifting and other things like that. So I have been a caregiver for a big part of my life. Parkinson's was 10 years for my father, so I knew what that was like to be a caregiver for a long period of time. And I know how much that takes to do. And I know that there are times when I was involved in that I thought, I wish I had another resource, or I wish there was someone who could do this from me, or take this from me, or take this from mom, this component of that caregiving. Not that we wanted to not be a part of the love that we had for dad and all of those kind of things, but just to make maybe some of those pieces a little bit easier. And I love this. I love what you guys are doing here. I genuinely feel like this is a place to come and get those connections, those resources, utilize this and find those resources. And I am more than happy to be a resource as well. If you want to find out where your loved one is in their journey, in their process of either finding out they have a cognitive decline, a dementia diagnosis, or wanting to find out more about, well, what potential type of cognitive decline is this? What type of dementia are we dealing with? Or if you just need someone that can help point you in the right direction of, here's where you can go to find this. Here's how you get in touch with MAG. Here's how you, somebody that can help direct some of those things. I know how valuable that can be for people. So we're here for you. And I know the people that are here and the resources that are out there are here for you. And I hope you'll utilize and take advantage of that connection that is there. But I have a lot of love for caregivers. Just know that. I know what you're doing, and I'm impressed. So thank you all. I appreciate your questions and participation.